The case of a girl who went for a walk and disappeared under strange circumstances. What happened next shocked everyone with unexpected twists and chilling discoveries. This case became one of the most perplexing in American history. But in the end, detectives managed to uncover the truth. Christy Lynn Mullins was born on August 28, 1960, in Columbus, Ohio. She grew up in a large family with 5 children. They all lived in a quiet neighborhood away from the hustle and bustle of the city in the summer of 1975. When Christy was 14, she spent most of her time hanging out with her friends and her sisters. Their favorite spot was the pool at the nearby residential complex, especially on hot summer days. Sometimes she also worked as a babysitter looking after the kids of people she knew. On August 22nd, one of them asked Christy to watch her child until late in the evening the next day. Christy woke up around noon and began pondering what to do with her birthday. Just 5 days away, she was eagerly anticipating it, so time seemed to pass very slowly for her. The day turned out to be extremely hot, with temperatures soaring up to 93 degrees. So Christy quickly decided that going to the pool would be the best way to spend time and cool off. She brought along her younger sister Kim, and they headed to the residential complex. Kim went straight into the water, while Christy opted to lounge on a deck chair. A few moments later, she was approached by her friend, and after a brief chat, they both left. Kim was surprised that her sister left her alone without saying anything, but decided not to follow her and stayed at the pool. Sometime later, Kim headed home, but her sister wasn't there. After a few hours passed without Christy showing up, Kim started to worry. She decided to walk around the streets to look for her, and soon ran into one of the neighbors. He said that about an hour ago, the police had found a girl's body a few miles away, but couldn't identify her. Kim rushed home and told her parents about it, who immediately called the police, explaining that they couldn't find their daughter. They were instructed to come to the mall, where officers showed them the body of the deceased girl. At first, the parents couldn't tell if it was their daughter because of the extensive bruises covered in her face. But soon the mother noticed a birthmark on the girl's leg and realized it was Christy. Once her identity was established, the police informed the shocked family about what had happened. Around 2:30 p.m., a man called 911 to report finding a human body in the wood area behind a shopping center. He, along with his wife and son, went there to buy a toy for their daughter. However, before the family went into the shopping center, their son said he wanted to take a walk in the wood area behind the building. There was a well-known trail among the trees that led to the river, and overall the place was quite picturesque, so people often went there just for walks. His parents agreed, and they walked along this path into the depths of the forest. As the family was coming back, they noticed something strange happening a few yards off the trail. Upon closer inspection, they saw a man on the ground leaning over someone and striking them with a piece of wood. The man saw them, got up, and fled. The father approached the spot and discovered a girl on the ground, covered in blood. His wife, who was undergoing medical training, tried to find a pulse on the victim, but was unable to find one. The man ran to the shopping center and called the police from one of the stores. He and his wife provided investigators with a description of the perpetrator. He was a young, tall, slender man, around 20 years old, with long dark hair down to his shoulders, was wearing only jean shorts and boots. Based on their description, the police created a sketch of the suspect and distributed it to patrol officers. The crime scene examination yielded no results. Officers found the piece of wood used as the murder weapon, but they couldn't find anything that could lead them to the perpetrator. It's worth noting that the victim's hands were tied with a telephone cord, and her bikini top was pulled down. The t-shirt she was wearing that day was found next to the body, along with her shoes. Despite this, forensic experts didn't find evidence of sexual assault. Investigators speculated that the perpetrator intended to assault her, but something scared him off. Despite the lack of leads, the police quickly realized which direction to focus on. Christy's younger sister revealed that she left the pool with her friend named Carol, so the police went to talk to her. Carol said that on that day an unknown man called her home claiming to be a DJ from a local radio station. He said that would be a cheerleading competition in their town, and the winners would get free tickets to the state fair. The caller claimed that the event would take place behind a shopping center and would start at 1:45 p.m. He told her to wait at the entrance to the trail in the woods where someone would meet her and explain everything. Obviously, this story seemed very suspicious to the police, but there were even more odd details. Carol claimed that initially she decided to go to this event with her sister, but halfway there, they ran into Christ and her sister. After a brief chat, Carol invited Christ to go with her, so they left the sisters behind and headed towards the shopping center. The girls arrived at the entrance to the woods and waited sitting on the fence, but no one showed up. Sometime later, Carol said she would go to the shopping center to ask for the time. It took only a few minutes, but when she returned, Christy was no longer there. She waited for a while, but no one appeared, so eventually she left. The police found no evidence to support the claim of any cheerleading competitions in town. They assumed that the CER could have been the killer attempting to lure Carol into the woods, or it could have been some prank unrelated to the murder. Either way, they couldn't trace the call, making it impossible to identify the caller. Investigators also noticed a discrepancy in Carol's story. She said she met Christy and her sister on the street while walking to the shopping center. However, Kim insisted that they were at the pool and Carol came to them there. But that's not all. Late that same evening, Christy's mother encountered Carol, who lived just a few dozen yards from their home, and they had a rather strange conversation. Carol began apologizing to the woman and said that things weren't supposed to go this far. She added that she was supposed to be the target and that two people were involved in the murder. Shocked, Christy's mother tried to get more details, but Carol refused to continue the conversation and left. The woman reported this to the police and they spoke with Carol again, but she claimed she hadn't said anything like that and insisted on the truthfulness of her initial version. Later, she was questioned again with a polygraph, and the operator didn't detect any signs of deception in response to key questions. After this, investigators shifted their focus away from Carol and continued searching for other leads in the following days. As news of the brutal murder spread throughout the city, local residents were gripped by widespread fear, realizing that a dangerous criminal was still at large. The situation was worsened by another fact: the police believed the killer was a local resident. As they knew about the trail behind the shopping center, detectives deployed all their resources to find the culprit, and 3 days after Chris's murder, there was a long-awaited breakthrough in the case. Around 5:00 p.m., a police officer was patrolling the center streets of Columbus when he spotted a man who remarkably resembled the sketch of Chris's killer. The patrol officers immediately contacted the detectives, who quickly arrived at the scene. They asked the man to go with them to the station to answer a few questions, and he agreed. He turned out to be 25-year-old Jack Carmen. Despite the fact that he voluntarily agreed to answer their questions, the police immediately faced a problem. The man had a significant intellectual disability. His IQ, according to various tests, was estimated to be around 50 points. Jack was under the care of a specialized medical institution and lived in an apartment provided by a non-profit organization. In where he worked, he couldn't read, write, and spoke poorly, but the detectives on Chris's case couldn't ignore the striking resemblance between him and the composite sketch. The interrogation proved to be very difficult. Most of the time, Jack answered the detectives' questions with a single word or just remained silent. They also began to doubt whether he was even fully capable of understanding and grasping the meaning of their questions. The interrogation stretched out for 6 hours, but eventually, the detectives began to make some progress by asking the most simple and concrete questions possible. They were able to extract the long-awaited confession from Jack. According to his words, on that day, he left his apartment and took a bus to the shopping center to buy himself pants and a shirt. As he walked through the parking lot towards the entrance, he noticed Chris sitting on the fence near the beginning of the trail leading into the woods. He approached the girl, grabbed her, tied her hands, and dragged her into the woods where he assaulted her. After that, Christy tried to escape, and that's when Jack caught up with her, grabbed a piece of wood from the ground, and struck her multiple times on the head. Then he ran to the main road in front of the shopping center and jumped on a bus. The next day, the police took him to the forest, and Jack pointed out the spot where he committed the crime. He also provided investigators with details that only the perpetrator could know, such as the fact that the piece of wood broke in half when he struck the victim with it. The detectives also lined up several people, including Jack, and asked the couple who found Christy to identify the person they saw that day. Both pointed to Jack. He was charged with several offenses, including assault and murder. Despite the fact that experts didn't find any evidence of sexual assault, Jack confessed to it, so the prosecution decided not to exclude it. The prosecutors sought the death penalty, but Jack's lawyer, with his consent, struck a deal. Jack had to admit his guilt before the judge and receive a life sentence instead of execution. Considering that thousands of people were following this case, everything happened very quickly. On September 3rd, just 11 days after the murder, Jack was sentenced to life imprisonment. But after the trial, many people began to doubt Jack's guilt. The more details about his confession and the man himself emerged in the media, the more people began to wonder, could he really have done something like this? Those who knew Jack initially didn't believe it. According to them, he never showed any signs of aggression. He was quite passive, timid, and compliant. He would tell any lie if someone demanded it firmly enough. For example, once at a charity center, he took the blame for a broken boiler even though someone else had done it. There were also doubts about Jack's ability to confess to the crime. He could barely speak, yet the police claimed that he had told them about the crime in utmost detail. Those who knew Jack believed that the investigators had simply fed him all the necessary information. They just needed to ask leading questions that already contained facts about the case. For example, did he strike the victim with a piece of wood? And if Jack answered yes, the police could already use it as a confession. One woman who was involved in Jack's treatment added that under threat, he could confess to anything. It was enough for him to hear that he faced the electric chair, and he would do whatever the detectives asked. But that's not all. Supporters of Jack's innocence found out that the police had brought him to the murder scene at the same time as the witnesses, the same married couple who later identified him among other people at the police station. So they had already seen Jack and knew that he was a suspect. The police had claimed that the witnesses didn't cross paths with Jack, but no one believed it. There were many more facts that raised strong doubts about Jack's involvement. For example, the police couldn't find the bus driver or even a single passenger who saw Jack on the way to the city center. According to his own confession, that's how he got home. But the most significant factor was the testimony of several people in the charity organization building where Jack lived and worked. They claimed to have seen him around 1:30 p.m. If he was indeed there, he had absolutely no chance of taking a bus to the shopping center on the outskirts of the city and committing the murder by 1:50 p.m. Even if he had left immediately after being seen by the witnesses, the bus would take at least 40 minutes to cover that distance. These facts made many people not just doubt Jack's guilt, but come to the conclusion that police had essentially coerced his confession. Even Christ's parents started to doubt that he was the real killer. On September 9th, just 6 days after the verdict, around 70 people gathered in front of the city hall to draw attention to the case and demand a thorough investigation. They formed a public committee with the goal of seeking justice. Thanks to this, Jack found a new lawyer who quickly filed for a case review. Several months later, a judge revoked Jack's confession and ordered a new trial. Now the prosecution had to prove his guilt practically from scratch, which seemed like an almost impossible task. While preparations for the new trial were underway, Christie's father, Norman Mills, conducted his own investigation. From the beginning, he didn't believe the detectives' thinking. They weren't doing enough to find his daughter's killer. Eventually, he decided not to rely on the police and started searching for answers himself. Soon after the murder, he and some neighbors went to the woods to inspect the area. There they found jean shorts and blood-stained men's underwear. They handed these items over to the police, who had initially just overlooked them. However, it remained unknown whether these items were linked to the case or even tested the new trial for Jack, began only in 1977, 2 years after the murder. The defense had two tasks: first and foremost, to prove Jack's innocence, and also to try to identify the real killer. In fact, they already had a pretty strong candidate for this role, whom they considered the most likely suspect. The man who found Chris's body with his wife, his name was Henry Newell, and at the time of the murder he was 25 years old. By the start of the trial, Jack's lawyers had gathered an impressive list of reasons to suspect Henry for the murder, and during the trial this list grew even longer. Initially, Henry drew attention because of his criminal record. Starting from his teenage years, he had been arrested numerous times for various offenses. Serving 3 prison terms, he had successfully escaped from jail twice before being caught and sent back. At the time of Jack's trial, he was serving his 4th sentence. This time, Henry had set his own house on fire to collect insurance money. The lawyers had also reviewed the evidence from Chris's case and found several very suspicious details in his testimony. Henry said he found her body, ran up to it, and tossed aside a blood-stained piece of wood. He explained this by saying he was in a state of shock at the time, but such an action still seemed odd. Why would he pick up the murder weapon and throw it away from the body without any apparent reason? He also claimed he thought the girl was still alive, so he took off his shirt and pressed it to her face. This action also raised questions. Did he really try to stop the bleeding, or did his shirt get bloody during the murder and he needed to justify it somehow? Jack's lawyers found a store employee in the mall where Henry ran to call the police. She said he wasn't wearing a shirt but had jean shorts on, although by the time the police arrived, he was already wearing different pants. The employee also claimed Henry had a fresh bruise on his face, as if someone had hit him. When asked why she didn't immediately tell the police about this, she said no one simply asked her. The officers themselves should have noticed this bruise, but they ignored it back. Then Henry also agreed to take a polygraph test, but he ended up vomiting right on the machine, so the police didn't arrange a new test. Another witness was Henry's neighbor. He said that on the night of the murder he spoke with Henry and noticed many fresh scratches on his hands. The man also mentioned seeing a telephone cord in Henry's garage of the same color and shape as the one used to tie the victim's hands. But that's not all. The neighbors stated that Henry once told him a very strange story. He claimed to know Carol, Chris's 14-year-old friend, and that they used to swim naked together in the pool. Considering he was 25 at the time, this story shocked everyone involved in the case. However, finding any direct evidence that this actually happened was simply impossible. Yet it indicated that Henry was acquainted with Carol, who also had a direct connection to the case. His wife, Pam, also testified in court. She said everything had happened exactly as they told the police. On the first day, they went to the mall and their son wanted to take a walk. They went to the woods and found the body. Pam added that up until that point, Henry had been at home and only stepped out for a few minutes to chase away the neighborhood kids who had started throwing firecrackers into their yard. Carol also testified. She stated that she had never met Henry. She was also asked about what she had meant when she told the victim's mother that things shouldn't have escalated so far. But Carol once again claimed she didn't remember saying anything like that. Henry himself was also brought into the courtroom from prison. He repeated his story without any changes and insisted that he had nothing to do with the crime. One of the most significant moments of the trial was the display of the full recording of Jack's interrogation. After viewing it, it became apparent to everyone that Jack was simply coerced into confirming the detective's words that he had committed the murder. Jack barely spoke and apparently didn't fully understand what the police wanted from him. But that wasn't the most crucial moment of the trial. On the 5th day, another unexpected witness appeared, neither anticipated by the prosecution nor Jack's lawyers. It was Bobby, Henry's stepson, and his testimony truly shocked everyone following the case. The boy revealed that on that day Henry did indeed leave the house to chase away kids throwing firecrackers in their yard. However, he was gone for more than just a few minutes, as his mother had claimed, but for over half an hour. When Henry returned home, his shirt and sandals were missing, and he had scratches on his arms. and faced Henry called Pam into another room where they had a conversation. After that, they came out and told Bobby that they were all going to the shopping center. Upon arriving, the parents immediately led him to the trail behind the shopping center. The boy claimed that he hadn't asked to go there for a walk, as his parents had initially stated. They entered the woods and almost immediately found Henry's sandals, one of which was torn. A little further, they saw Chris's body, and his mother instructed Bobby never to tell anyone about what he saw. The boy added that he only decided to tell the truth after having a conversation with his biological father, who had convinced him to do the right thing. His grandmother also testified in court and recounted one strange episode involving Henry. She, along with him and Pam, attended Chris's farewell ceremony. On the way back, the woman said what a tragedy it was, and Henry suddenly replied, "It will teach her to keep her mouth shut." Another witness was Henry's friend. He said that Henry once confessed to him that he killed Christy. He added that the killing was accidental, not planned. In the end, this trial left practically no doubt that Jack had no involvement in the crime, and eventually all charges against him were dropped. But here's where it gets interesting. Despite the overwhelming evidence pointing to Henry's involvement, the prosecutor stated that he had no intention of pursuing a case against him. He also noted that the initial investigation was conducted in the best possible way. However, the prosecutor pointed out that the police either failed to notice or ignored a vast amount of clues and evidence available to them. From day one, his response sparked a wave of public outrage. It reached such heights that 2 days later, the prosecutor had to backtrack and agreed to reopen the investigation into Christie's case. But here was a serious problem. Investigators relied on the initial investigation, including the testimonies of Henry and Pam. In other words, the police still operated under the assumption that the couple stumbled upon Chris's body in the woods with a long-haired, shirtless man looming over her. For this reason, investigators stated that they would be looking for new suspects resembling Jack. Of course, such an approach yielded no results. The investigation continued for several months, and eventually this case went cold. Chris's father never gave up on seeking justice. Once he filed a civil lawsuit against Jack, but the reasons for such a move were not as simple as it might have seemed. The man didn't believe in Jack's involvement in the murder, but this legal process would have granted him access to the case files, giving him the opportunity to collect all the available information. Unfortunately, this also yielded no results. In 2006, Christie's father passed away from cancer, never having closure in the case for a long time. There was no progress in the investigation of Chris's murder until 2013, when former attorney John Aller took an interest in the case. He decided to conduct his own investigation, reaching out to all involved parties, hoping to find new leads. Chris's relatives handed him a box containing all of her father's records, which he had been gathering up until his death. All went through the mall, spoke to dozens of people, and it became evident to him that the culprit behind this murder was none other than Henry. During his investigation, he found out that Christie's friend Carol was into smoking marijuana at the time. Digging deeper, he uncovered something else and concluded that she, like some other teenagers, apparently was buying it from Henry. This became another link between him and Carol, and could indicate the real reason why the girl went to that forest. He theorized that the whole story about the DJ was simply made up, and in reality, Carol arranged to meet Henry in the forest to buy the illegal substance. Perhaps she decided to invite Christie along under some other pretexts, such as using the same story about the DJ in cheerleading competition. Another much darker version suggested that Carol may have initially lured Christie there at Henry's request, who had planned to assault her. However, the girl fought back, as evidenced by the scratches and bruises on his body, and the man killed. But delving deeper into the case, all discovered that by that time, Henry had committed even more crimes, including domestic violence and assault. There was another incident linked to him, but he wasn't tried for it: the death of his wife Pam. In 1982, she filed for divorce, and just a month later she was found dead in their apartment, where she still lived with Henry. The official cause of death was a sleeping pill over, and the police found a note indicating that she did it herself. Pam's relatives didn't believe this version and suspected that Henry had tampered with the pills. The stranger part of this whole story was that no package of sleeping pills was found in the apartment, even though Pam obviously couldn't have disposed of it. After taking such a large amount that same year 2013, when all took on the case, Henry passed away from cancer at the age of 63. Despite this, Allah continued his work and released a book containing all available information about Christ's murder. The release of the book sparked a new wave of interest in the case, and Christie's relatives, along with other people, began demanding to reopen the investigation. Several of Henry's relatives also reached out to all, stating that their entire family knew that he was the one who killed the girl, but kept silent. One of them recounted that a few months before her 16th birthday, Henry had given her a car as a gift. They went for a ride together, and at some point he asked her to stop, looked at her, and said that he had killed Christie, detailing the crime in full. The woman said she couldn't believe it. According to her, Henry had been drinking a lot, and she thought he had simply made up this story under the influence of alcohol. However, after reading All's book, everything fell into place for her. All of this led to the reopening of the murder investigation in May of 2014. For many months, detectives re-examined all the available evidence, interviewed dozens of people, and re-evaluated the leads in his confession to his relative. Henry mentioned that he had assaulted Christie at the time. Medical experts found no evidence of that, but now with modern technology, they re-examined Chris's clothing and found traces of scene. Unfortunately, the traces were so small that conducting DNA analysis was simply impossible. The investigation continued until the end of 2015, when detectives called a press conference 40 years after the murder. They finally announced that they have no doubt that Henry was the one who committed it. However, since he was no longer alive, they couldn't take this case to court. It was officially declared solved, and the investigation was closed. Without Henry's confession, investigators couldn't be 100% sure of exactly what had happened, but they had a strong idea. Most likely when Henry had left home that day, he went to the trail behind the shopping center. Perhaps Carol invited him there so she could buy weed, but that part cannot be confirmed. Once there, he saw Chris alone and decided to assault her. He tied her hands with a foam cord and took her further into the woods, where she fought back. Chris managed to scratch him and hit him in the face, after which Henry likely knocked her down and killed her with a piece of wood he had found nearby. He then returned home, told his wife what had happened, and they both came up with a plan how he could avoid punishment. It's worth mentioning that Carol never told the truth. After all these years, it's possible she was somehow involved, and we can't exclude that one day she'll come forward during the press conference. The police also apologized to Chris' family for how negligently their predecessors handled the case. There was enough evidence from the beginning to charge Henry with the murder, but the investigators either didn't notice it or simply ignored it. Share your thoughts on this story in the comments section.